I've been a learning coach for the past 13 years. During this time, I've been able to complete medical school as well as work as a doctor and complete my master's while running 2 businesses full-time. I now run a learning program at I Can Study where I have coached tens of thousands of people with these same methods to triple their productivity. And today, I'm going to compress 13 years of no BS productivity advice into this one video. Number 1, don't trust your brain. This is probably the most important thing to help you do more while working less. I had this classmate back in medical school. Her name was Hannah. And throughout medical school, she was this very hardworking, super diligent, like role model student. And so I was really surprised when recently she reached out to me for a consultation. And she said that she'd been struggling for years because she felt like she was always busy. She had just bought a house and she was trying to start a family and she was trying to enter into this very, very competitive surgical training program. And there were all these pressures and all these different goals. And she felt she was getting further and further from being able to achieve them while being so busy that she had no more time to spare. So I said, what are you doing to be more productive? And she was doing a lot of good things, like she was making schedules, she was making to-do lists, she was prioritizing her tasks, very important. So what was the problem? The problem was that she trusted her brain too much. She trusted that when she makes a plan, her brain will follow through on that. She trusted that when there's a schedule, her brain will follow it. That when there is a priority, that her brain will stick to it and not get distracted. And the important thing that she had to realize is that your brain is not there to help you reach your productivity goals. Your brain is just there to keep you alive. It's always looking for the energy efficient shortcut, which your plans probably aren't. Your plans probably aren't easy. They require hard work and consistency. So you have to expect that if you're trying to be productive, that is not going to be natural. Your brain is going to make errors. And for Hannah, she expected and trusted that her brain will be able to perform perfectly every single day. And so she should have this week or 2 of like blistering productivity. Everything's going great. And then something happens and she'd beat herself up over it. And she'd say like, yet again, what she said is like, I keep trying and trying, and every time I try, I keep failing. And the reason why this is such an important one to start with is that it forces your perspective on other things that might help your brain to perform a little bit better. So for example, Hannah, she never scheduled breaks for herself because there was so much she wanted to do and there was never enough time. Why would she take time off? And as a result, she was getting burnt out. Well, guess what? Being burnt out is very unproductive. So what I want to really help redefine, and like if you take nothing away from this video other than this one message, I think this is the one that makes the biggest difference, is that productivity is not about being busy. Productivity is anything that gets you closer to your goals. Anything and any goal. Your goal could be to live in isolation in the mountains like a hermit. Totally fine. I wish I could have such a goal because that sounds awesome. If that's your goal, then the things you do that get you closer to that goal, that's productivity. Productivity is not about like being busy, having 50 different apps, a fully filled calendar. That's not what productivity is. In fact, a lot of those things can take away from productivity. Productivity is understanding what you need, when you need it, that gets you towards your goal and then committing to that action. And sometimes that means getting more sleep. That means taking a break. That means reflecting, spending time with your loved ones, not working over a certain holiday. And this was a tough pill for me to swallow for myself because I'm kind of like a workaholic. That's what true productivity is. That's what allows you to have the longevity and the sustainability of just being able to day in and day out just do what you need to do for so long that you inevitably reach your goals. And by starting off not trusting our brain to be a perfect executor, we switch from being on the back foot, reacting to problems and errors and obstacles that come up because our brain wasn't perfect. And we start thinking proactively, okay, what are the barriers? What are the challenges I may face with following this plan, with following this schedule? Realistically, for my brain, where is it going to struggle and where is it going to make mistakes? Let's plan for that. And immediately, that reduces the amount of just stress and burden on a daily basis of trying to be productive. And I truly believe that you cannot have sustained productivity without sustained self-compassion. Number 2, start small, then nuclear. Once we start thinking about productivity and reaching our goals in a more sustainable way, we start realizing that there are really a lot of things that we can start doing to improve our productivity and give our brain a better chance. And so the real question is, where do you start? Anytime there's any error or issue with your productivity, whether it's your scheduling or your task management or your prioritization or your distractibility or procrastinating, whatever it is, start with the thing that you feel is easy and obvious to fix, where you have a pretty high certainty that doing this is going to help you. And it doesn't really matter if it's the most important thing to start with. Just start with the ones that you feel confident to lock in. Because if there are 100 things you need to work on, the best position for you to be in is to then have 99. In my first few years of university, I used to experiment with like everything all at once. Like I was using different schedules, different sleep schedules, different task management apps. I actually had a period of time where I was using like 3 or 4 different task management apps at the same time to see which one was better. And the result was I wasted a lot of time unnecessarily. The better approach is just lock in on one thing that you think you can get better at, fix that thing, and then move on to the next thing. You're immediately getting the value of having one less problem, and it means that it's easier to think about the next problem. If you try to fix all 100 things at the same time, you're guaranteed to fix none of them. So what does nuclear mean? Nuclear means that if you weren't able to solve a problem by using the small strategies, don't just keep fluffing around with like more little things that may or may not work. Just throw the whole truck at it. Most common example for this is procrastination and distractions. You might say, hey, I can install an app blocker and that might stop me from doom scrolling on Instagram. And that's my small immediate thing. Great. Give it a go. Start small. Let's say you do that and it doesn't work. You're still getting distracted. You found a way around your app blocker. Don't just keep piling on tiny little things that may or may not make a difference. If you failed on that one, then it means that the problem is bigger than that, right? It means that there's a strong habit. There's a strong force there that's bringing you back to that problem. Just throw the whole truck at it. Delete the app on your phone completely. Block it on your computer so that you can't access it. Do absolutely everything that you can to just eradicate it and then just see how that works. And the reason I say this is because it is much easier to go nuclear than scale back down to something that's more realistic than it is to figure out where that realistic point is through these tiny little steps one by one, where it's very, very frustrating, it's very demotivating, and you never know whether you're going to reach it. If you start nuclear, the problem's gone, done, it's solved. Now you can slowly start reintroducing things, bringing it back down to figure out where that line is. Don't let problems linger for months or even years when you could just crush them in a week. When I was a doctor, one of the really interesting things about working in a healthcare system in New Zealand, it's a public healthcare system. So we're always very wary about resource usage. You can't just have a patient come into the emergency room and you just give them every single scan and blood tests that's available to you. That's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of investigations that we're doing, which may not be necessary. And so the idea is that you focus on where you think it's going to provide you the most value. So let's say someone comes in with a sore leg. Okay, cool. We're going to do an x-ray of the leg. That becomes the best thing to do now, because that's probably the thing that provides us the most information and most value to make a diagnosis and treat this person. And if that's not enough, then we think about it like, okay, well, what's the next thing? And so this is called Sutton's Law, which was named after this guy called William Sutton, who like 100 years ago was a train robber. And he robbed this train, which was full of gold. And they asked him, hey, why'd you rob this train? And he said, because that's where the money is at. And so Sutton's Law became, go for where the money is at. And I'm not talking about money in terms of like cash money. I'm talking about go for the money in terms of where the value is. In productivity, remember how I said that I used to use like 4 different task management apps at the same time to figure out which one was best. That's not where the main value was at. Thinking back on it now, the biggest thing for me would have been, how do I just reduce my procrastination? And if I think about how much of my time and effort and energy on figuring out productivity was spent on that, removing procrastination, I would say very, very little, like less than 10% of my effort and attention was directed at that, even though that's, for me, the biggest bottleneck. That would have been where the money is at. And so what I often find when I'm coaching people is that usually there may be 100 different things that you could work on, but there's only like 1 or 2 things that if you were to solve those, you could double your productivity off the bat. And they're usually big, sticky problems that you don't know how to handle. But that just means that it's important to start trying to solve them as early as you can, because it's going to take time. And be very careful about getting really excited about things that feel like it's going to be really helpful for your productivity, but it's not where the money is at. Like I used to go and open up the App Store and like scroll through different productivity apps to see what new productivity app is on the App Store that might just magically solve my problem. It's not going to happen. And I've been doing this for a long enough time to know that's just not how it works. That app is not going to solve it. That app is a distraction. That app and that behavior of you trying to look for the easy solution that feels exciting is the thing that's stopping you from being more productive. So figure out what's holding you back the most. That's where the value is. Focus there. Number 4, do more with less. When you start thinking about where the value really is for improving your productivity, you start realizing that a lot of solutions are actually just more problems. And the common example here is when people use a lot of different apps and a lot of different frameworks and a lot of different types of kind of solutions. Like they'll download a template from here and they'll have this app for this and this app for this. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't use apps, but try to do as much as you can with as little as you can. I have gone from using 4 different task management apps, 3 different calendar apps, 1 for my phone, 1 for my laptop, and then 1 for my tablet, because each app performs slightly differently across the 3. I've gone from that to now I have a task management app. I have a notebook, like a literal, just sitting on my desk, that just has me writing on it with an actual pen. I use Google Calendar, and that's basically it. That's all I need to maintain what I think is a pretty high level of productivity for a long time now. As I've gotten deeper and deeper into understanding what makes productivity sustainable, I've realized that when you have a system of productivity that uses so many different components, each one of those components introduces a chance of error or complication. It increases the amount of friction. If there's an update on one app, we have to think about how that update might affect us. If there's, one app doesn't work, we have to think of another workflow around that. And so again, I'm not saying don't use apps. There are a lot of apps that I don't use that I know are very effective and can help you be really productive. What I'm saying is that if you are in that mindset where you're constantly looking for more things that help you with your productivity, you're probably going to get more value from learning to just do more with what you already have, or even less of it. Number 5, prioritize deep flow. I don't know if you know this already, but there is no such thing as multitasking. And in fact, trying to switch between multiple tasks constantly is very distracting, and it reduces your overall productivity. And for real productivity, there are very few things more powerful than the ability to just have a single task and lock in. That feeling of flow when you don't even know time is passing. You are on a roll. Your brain is just wired in, and it's just high quality work. That being able to take that, like if you could, bottle that into a pill and just take that every single time, that probably is a drug and it's probably illegal. Don't do that. But like, if you could just wave a magic wand and access flow anytime that you wanted, so many of your problems would be solved. You would not get distracted as much. Your productivity would just go through the roof because you just get so much done when your brain is in that flow state. And you can literally just use that as like your universal question you ask yourself. Is this thing going to help or harm my ability to focus in and concentrate on a single task? And again, don't trust your brain. Don't trust that just because you want to enter into flow, you will be able to enter into flow. There are certain triggers that help you into flow, and there are certain things that pull you out of flow. You're not going to know what all of those things are off the bat. Learn about those. Expect to fail. Expect to try to enter into flow and struggle, and then document it. What's stopping you? What hinders you and harms you from entering into that flow state? And when you're in that flow, what's pulling you out of it? Start understanding your personal barriers and triggers and optimize your environment and your processes to add or remove them. And once you can figure that out, then you're in a great position for the next one, which is number 6. Find flow times in your day. I heavily underestimated this. When I was in halfway through university, like 4th and 5th year of university, I was entering into full-time hospital placement. So it was harder for me to find places to just sit down and just study for long periods of time during the day. And so I didn't think this would be a problem. In my schedule, I had this nice study block just after dinner. And that was when I was meant to get all my deep work and studying done. Unfortunately, my hit rate on being able to have a good study session during that block was like 50%. Half the time, I don't get any study done because something happens during dinner, or it goes longer than expected, or I feel sleepy or tired, or there's some other distraction, or I just want to relax and, I just let myself relax instead. And what I realized is that period after dinner, and this is true to this day, is that period of 2-3 hours after dinner for me is not a good flow time. Anytime I try to do anything that requires deep concentration immediately after dinner, it doesn't work. Same for immediately after lunch, just doesn't work. And so I deliberately do not plan anything that requires deep flow during those times because it's a high risk move. And what I found is that for me, deep flow either happens around 4 p.m. just before dinner, and I think the urgency of eating is kind of helps me through that, or earlier in the morning or later at night. And so depending on what my schedule looks like, that's when I decide to do my most important tasks. Those are my optimum flow times for the day. And those times are going to be different for you, so experiment a bit and figure it out. Now, as you can see, productivity is a very personalized thing, and it's basically impossible to cover every single technique that you'll ever need that works for everyone. But I still want to help you to build a personalized productivity system, which is one of the reasons why I created my free weekly newsletter, which goes through even more productivity techniques and tips to help you build a system that works for you. Each email takes about 3 to 5 minutes to read, but can save you 3 to 10 hours a week. As I said, it's completely free. I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to sign up. And back to the next productivity tip. Number 7, use a distraction cheat sheet. I talk about this a lot, but a distraction cheat sheet is literally just a piece of paper right next to you on your desk that you can have open while you're studying, while you're working, and anytime you get distracted, you just write down what it is that distracted you. And then you can try to remove it, deal with the distraction, get back to work. But what it does is it means that over time, as you start learning about the things that bring you in and out of focus, you can start optimizing your environment deeper and in a more personalized way. Those distractions no longer affect you if you remove them in advance. The problem is that we're often completely unaware of what those distractions are, and we let them bother us every single time we have a study session. Funny example of this is years ago when I was coaching this university student for their studying, and they were always getting distracted because their dog, so their brother used to always walk the dog during the day when they were studying, and the dog would just go barking and crazy as it's walking outside. But her desk was facing the window. So as soon as they walk past, she sees her brother and the dog walking through. And because it's like barking and making a big scene, that's the thing that pulls her out of focus. And so when she gets pulled out of focus, she really struggled with getting back into that flow. And then by the time she's back into that flow, her brother's back from the walk, and then she gets broken out of flow again. So it's kind of like this 1-2 hours in between where it's like, man, this is really low quality time being used. I'm getting really, really distracted. And I feel like I've had a really good session that got disrupted. And she said this has been happening for months. And so she's a smart person. It's not like she doesn't know that she could do something about it, but it never really occurred to her to be proactive about that distraction because she never made it a point. She would get distracted and be like, okay, well, that's something that happened, and then just focus on getting back into the task. As soon as we brought it to light and made it clear, this is the thing that's actually distracting you, it became obvious, like, oh, okay, I'm just going to put headphones on, turn my desk the other way. And literally overnight, we solved it. She just got like 1 to 2 hours of additional focus per day, just like that. That's the power of just making the invisible visible. It gives you the chance to do something about it. And I can guarantee you that 70, 80% of the things that distract you are things that you could easily solve, that you just aren't aware of what the actual distraction is. And the distraction cheat sheet helps with that. Number 8, create focus zones. Most of the time when people talk about focus zones, they're talking about a workspace, like a physical desk that is free of clutter, it's organized, it's clean, free of distractions to help you focus and enter into flow. And those are really important. And I agree that you should do that. But that's not where a focus zone ends. And sometimes you don't have the choice. And sometimes it's actually beneficial. Like I have always found that I respond very, very well and am able to enter into deep flow when I go and work at cafes. And I know this is not the same for everyone, but I like to go to a cafe, find a nice quiet table by a corner, plug in some noise canceling earphones, listen to some white noise, and just focus in. And I'm able to lock in very, very, very quickly. If I work at a cafe every single day, that effect actually disappears, and I've tested that. But that's not an optimized environment whatsoever. Like I've got a tomato sauce bottle, like kind of like bumping against my elbow. Like it's not comfortable. There's lots of distractions. So why is it that becomes such a good focus zone? And this is the important thing, is that a focus zone is really just a mental headspace. Your focus zone can be in any situation that you want, as long as you know what criteria need to be met for your brain to enter into that mode of getting into deep flow. And this is the thing that really allowed me to have really good productivity. Like when I'm traveling, I'm on a plane, I'm in a car, I'm walking, I'm like driving, I'm in a cafe, wherever it is. And for me, what I realized is that number one, noise is the biggest thing. So if I've got noise canceling headphones and I've got white noise playing, 70% of that criteria for me is met. The second thing is the state of mind when I'm entering into that environment. If I am like watching a YouTube video, I'm watching some Netflix on my laptop, and I'm in that mode and I'm at my desk, which is a perfect environment. And then I'm like, okay, time for me to do some study or work. It's much, much more difficult for me to enter into that flow because I didn't enter that environment with the purpose of working. This is actually the reason why I don't do that at all anymore. Like this room that I'm in, I am in this room only to work. As soon as I'm done with work, I actually leave the room. I do not enter here unless it is intentionally for working. But it's the same thing for when I go to a cafe. I go to a cafe not to drink coffee and like have fun and then I was like, oh, I may as well do some work here. I'm going to a cafe explicitly for the intention of doing some work. And it is that the entering of a space with the intention of doing something that helps prep my mind for flow. And the interesting thing that I found is that this works in a lot of different scenarios. Like even getting on a plane. Sometimes, and I've done a lot of traveling in the last couple of years, I'll get onto a plane and I'll think, okay, so I've got some time here. I could just crack out some work. I'll get onto the plane, I'll have my laptop there, and I'll think, okay, well, what's there to watch, in terms of like the in-flight entertainment. I'll take out my laptop and I'll try to do some work, but it doesn't feel very good. Other times I'm like, all right, I need to get this thing done. I've got 2 hours on this plane. That's when I'm going to do it. As soon as I walk into the plane and take my seat, I am already like prepped and primed to do work. Like that is the intention almost of being on that plane in a way. And it is so much easier for me to enter into that flow. And so intention actually makes a huge difference, which is why a hot tip for helping to create a focus zone is not only think about what are the distractions and limit the distractions, but it's actually set clear intentions. Don't let yourself kind of like roll into your focus activity. Make a clear boundary between what you were doing before and the focused task that you want to do. Have a clear intention. You can even write it down, and especially I recommend this for my ADHD students, is like write it down like on a post-it note, like stick it on your monitor or something like very clearly, and enter the environment, enter the activity very actively with that clear intention. And once that's done, leave, exit from that, jump out of the plane, pull the emergency. It's like, I'm done with my work. Send the email, emergency exit open, just skydiving out. Make that entry and exit into your focus zone very deliberate. And very quickly, you'll start realizing that it's much easier to get into flow. By the way, don't jump out of a plane, if I needed to say that for YouTube. Number 9, use work rest timers. You've probably heard of Pomodoro, which is like a 25-minute work block followed by a 5-minute or 10-minute rest. This is called a work rest timer. So you have work and then you've got rest timed. And there's lots of different variations: Pomodoro, Flowmodoro. I've got my own called Optimized for Focus work rest timing. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which one you use, but if you really need to lock in, then using a work rest timer can help you, because it creates a sense of urgency when you're doing your focused work, and it means that when you take your rest, that's timed as well. So it prevents you from getting distracted with something else. There are a couple caveats though that I've found make work rest timing much more effective. First of all, if you are in a really good flow state, you can do work potentially for 1, 2, 3 hours without needing the break. Taking the break from a Pomodoro timer, and this is the main issue I have with like a fixed timer, like the original Pomodoro, is that you can have 25 minutes of great focus and then you break for no reason. You don't need the rest. You're in a great state. And now when you try to get back into it, it takes time. It can take you 5-10 minutes just to get back into that sense of flow that you had before and pick up where your thoughts left off. Don't do that. Start a timer. Figure out how long you generally tend to be able to enter into a flow state for before you feel like you're getting a little distracted, you're losing your edge, you might need that break. And just get a sense for how long that is. And maybe that is only 20, 25 minutes. That's fine. But maybe it's 45 minutes, maybe it's an hour. And get a general sense for how long you're able to stay in flow in different kind of energy levels. Usually if I sit down to do some work, I'll be able to tell, okay, I feel like I'll be able to have a really good 1.5 hour focused flow session. Whereas sometimes I feel like I'm going to struggle getting through half an hour. That's fine. Like that's life. That's us understanding that our brain isn't perfect. So make the work time roughly similar to where you expect your flow is going to end. And again, that takes a little bit of experimentation. And then the rest time, generally keep that to about 1/4 to 1/3 of how long you did your work for, and then monitor how long you're able to focus for later. So if you take a rest and then you go back into another session, but now you find that your second session is like half the amount of focus as the first one, your rest was probably a little bit too short, or you were getting distracted with other things during your rest instead of letting your brain recover. Number 10, hire the babysitter. Let's say you have a baby and you want to go on a holiday. You would hopefully not leave the baby just alone for like 3 days while you go on vacation. You're not going to like just leave all the knives on the ground and just like the baby just crawling around. Like, I'm sure the baby will be fine. Like you wouldn't do that. You would hire a babysitter to look after the baby while you're gone. The hire the babysitter is like this ridiculous concept that of course we wouldn't do that for a baby, because we understand that a baby is like fragile and precious, and the risk and the consequence if you were to do that could be catastrophic. And I think we should think about that for our time as well. Time is one of the most precious resources that we have. And we do often very, very little to protect our time. Here's an example. Back in the early days, I always used to schedule like a planning prioritization session immediately as I got home from school or uni. I think I probably managed to do it 5% of the time, because every time I get home, I just can't be bothered. I'm just too tired. When I enter through that door, a wave of uncontrollable relaxation envelops my body. And I realize that I don't want to be productive. I want to be a blob. And so I just don't do anything. Hire the babysitter in this context means that we recognize, again, we're not trusting our brain to just follow through on it. We recognize that there are these risks to our time, and we deliberately take actions and steps to prevent that. I call this time protection. So let's say you get home at 5 p.m. And so between 5 to 5:30, you had scheduled some meditation session. Great. But every single time you get home, you're too tired and you never do it. All right. So how could we protect that time? Well, the reason we don't do it is because we feel tired. So perhaps what we can do is immediately when we get home, instead of trying to do the meditation, we go for a 5-minute walk, a stroll around the block that gives us a little bit of energy. Maybe we just do 5 push-ups, just enough to give us a little bit of energy. And by adding that additional task, which isn't the number one priority, it actually helps us transition into the number one priority. Hiring the babysitter for your productivity means recognizing that your time is always under attack from other people that want your attention, from unforeseen events, life in general. These are things that are going to rob that time that you have carved out for something that you know is important for your life and for you to progress towards your goals. And if it is important to do, it's important enough to hire the babysitter, protect against those risks. And if you cannot, if the babysitter is not available at that time, don't just leave. Move it to a different time. If you cannot do anything that helps you be more energized, if you can't do anything that helps you be more concentrated to do your meditation or whatever it is that you were planning to do at 5 p.m., don't schedule it for 5 p.m. Because by doing that, you are saying, I recognize the risk, it's likely to happen, and I'm willing to let it happen anyway. And if it's important, that's not wise. Number 11, plan for the real, not the ideal. One of the things that Hannah used to do, the classmate I told you about, is that she would have these really packed schedules. And if she was able to do all of the stuff in that day, she'd be like achieving her goals. Like, that's great. But most of the time, those schedules don't happen as planned. Most of the time, she's reaching the end of the day feeling like a failure because she wasn't able to tick off everything on that list. But her rationale for having it on the list was, well, if I don't do it, if I don't complete these tasks to this schedule, then I'm never going to be able to reach my goal. It's already not enough. If I start taking things off, it will definitely not be enough. So I said, Hannah, there is no point making a fantasy schedule. Just because it's written down in your schedule obviously doesn't mean it's going to occur. And if you know that it's not realistic, and you have repeatedly seen that the schedules you make are ones that you're not able to consistently complete, and you keep scheduling in that same way, you're living in a fantasy. Whether you like it or not, you're getting less done than you planned. The only difference now is that in one situation, you recognize realistically how much you're getting done, and you can now proactively plan for how you might mitigate that risk and still achieve your goals. Whereas on the other hand, you are planning and imagining that you're going to have that perfect brain that's able to do everything every single day for the next 3 months, and nothing's going to go wrong. And anytime something does go wrong, now you're reacting. you're getting a spike in cortisol, your stress is increasing, it's decreasing your quality of life, it's making you more anxious, and every single day you're hitting yourself with the burden of having to replan, reschedule, and reprioritize, and constantly feeling like you're falling behind. But the reason you're falling behind is because you are setting a goal where catching up is not realistic. And so one of the most important first steps before you start scheduling and using time blocking or time boxing is to do a time track. When you're first starting out, don't create like an elaborate schedule. Just do things in your day that you think you need to do, and retrospectively note down how long everything took you. Make your schedule in retrospect. And what this will do is this will give you visibility on how much you're able to get done on different kinds of days. Like on a bad day, this is what I get done. On an average day, this is what I get done. On a good day, this is what I get done. And then start seeing how many good days versus average days do you have? What affects that? Try to have more good days, but have a realistic understanding of how much you're able to get done. And then when you make a plan, you now have data. You know how much you can get done on an average day. And you know that maybe you can schedule in 1 or 2 good days per week because you know you can pull that off. And if you do this and you realize, man, if I schedule things in this way, I'm not going to be able to reach my goal. You only have 2 options there. Number 1, have more good days, which is, by the way, really, really hard to do. It's really hard to have consistently good days every single day for an extended period of time. So if you're like just not gonna make it, maybe that's a viable option. But if there's a big gap between what you need to do and what you've scheduled, then that's probably not viable. The second thing is you gotta evaluate either your goal or your methods. And it's a tough pill to swallow to say reevaluate the goal, to say that, hey, like based on this realistic, semi-optimistic schedule that you've made, you still will not be able to reach that goal. That may be the reality. And if you put yourself in that position, now you can at least plan. Okay, this is likely what's going to happen. I'm going to still try to have more good days, but I have to expect that this is maybe the reality that I won't be able to meet this goal. But again, when at first I fail, reevaluate, ask myself why, and then try it again differently. Next time, what will I do differently? How will I hit the goal next time? And it puts yourself in a much more productive mindset. Reality happens whether you like it or not, so plan for the real, not the ideal. Now, we're only just over halfway through the video, and I'm still just scratching the surface of the research and my experience at becoming more productive. So if you're enjoying this format, please let me know in the comments so that I know that I can keep making these types of videos for you. 13 years is a very long time to spend on learning about learning and productivity, and I've picked up hundreds of these tips and pieces of advice that I would love to share with you. And your comments help me know what to focus on. Now, on to the next game changer productivity tip, number 12, or not and. One of my coaching clients recently emailed me asking, hey, Justin, I'm really interested in enrolling in this new German course because they just want to learn how to speak German. And they're currently going through and also doing a course on AI and machine learning. And so I said, cool, that's a great idea. What do you want to give up to do that? And I said, well, what do you mean? I just want to do the German course. And I said, well, look, you're already running your business. You're already doing an AI ML course. You're already taking my program and getting coaching from me. You have a family and kids that already feel like you don't spend enough time with them. And now you're saying that you want to pick up a German course. I'm all for doing more things that provide fulfillment, but also I'm all for realizing that time is limited and we have to spend our time on the things that make the most impact and value to us. Remember, productivity is not about being busy. Productivity is about doing the things that get us towards your goal. And I know, I was talking to him, that for you, your main goal is to provide for your family. How is a German course helping with that goal? Is that productive or not? What do you want to take away? And this is the or, not and framework. Instead of saying, I want to do this and this, we make a much more strict prioritization by saying, I want to do this or this. We face ourselves with the consequence of losing something we already have to justify whether we want to do something else or do something new. And I think this is really valuable for people that just can't say no, right? Is that like, great, you want to do something else. Awesome. You can say yes. You just have to know that you're saying or, not and. It's not yes, you'll do this and all your other stuff. If you decide to do this, what will you choose to discard from what you're already doing? And if you can't look at anything you're already doing and say, yes, I'm willing to discard that, then you have to be very, very honest with yourself. Do I already have enough time for all of that and time for myself with not trusting my brain and having enough room for error? If the answer is yes, cool. Maybe you can just do it. You're under capacity. Feel free. Just do it. It's an and situation. Most of the time, especially if you feel busy, that's not going to be the case. Most of the time, you barely have enough time for all of this stuff. You almost never have time for yourself, and your room for error is razor thin as it is. You already need to take one of those things that you're doing and then stop doing them. That and is not going to happen. That's an or situation. So or, not and. Now, you might say, okay, well, I understand that I'm meant to do less and focus on more things, like more deeply, but I see all these other people that are way more productive than me, that get way more stuff done. How do I become like them? Well, there are a few strategies that I've picked up over the years that have actually allowed me to just literally do more stuff and have a greater capacity. And these are my favorite ones. Number 13, use the 2-minute rule. The 2-minute rule says that if you have a list of things that you need to do and it takes you 2 minutes or less to do it, don't bother scheduling it in or prioritizing it. Just do it. The time it takes for you to think about and consider and schedule and prioritize and just having that as an item on your schedule that you need to like rejig with everything else is not worth the effort if you can just get it done within 2 minutes or less. So often this will be things that are like emails, messages, taking out the bins, setting up the laundry, like household chores, little things here and there. Like they take very short amount of time, and it's better to have them off your plate and checked off than to even spend the time to think about it. Once you've done all of your 2-minute tasks, number 14, book the scan. A lot of the time I spent as a junior doctor was in surgical rotations. And in a surgical ward round, we're seeing like 100, 150 patients in the morning, and then we have to rush off into the operating theater. And so you have very, very little time to see each patient. Like literally we're spending like 10 to 20 seconds per patient. And during that time, we have to write up an entire set of notes, figure out what the plan is. And as a junior, you're just like following along, trying to desperately keep up with what's going on. And one of the things that we were taught to do is just to book the scans right there on the spot. Don't wait until we've seen all the patients to then look at your list of patients and be like, okay, so this one needs a CT scan, this one needs an X-ray, this one needs whatever. And then at that point, go and make the request for like, this patient needs a CT scan for this thing. Why? Why should we not do that? And why should we book the scan immediately on the spot? Because once you send the request to book a scan, it takes time for that request to be received and then approved. Maybe they've got questions, and then an orderly will come and collect the bed. They get taken off. And so that all takes time. By the time we are done with our round, we need to get into operating theater and start operating. So if patients haven't had their scans yet, all of these things create delays. And so that might mean that someone that could have been operated on today gets operated on tomorrow or next week because of a 4, 5, 10, 20-minute delay in requesting a scan. In productivity, there are certain tasks that don't take that long for you to do, but there is a delay in someone else having to receive it, having to think about it, asking questions. It's being sent out to someone else. So for you, it may not be like that important of a task for you to do right now. And it may not be that urgent for you right now, but it's understanding that by booking the scan first, sending that message, sending that email to someone, sending that thing for them to review, now early on, you are unblocking your future self, because by the time you need to do something about that, it's already come back to you. Because the worst thing is for you to do all the stuff that you need to do, you're like in this really good state, and then you've got all these things that are now just waiting for other people, and now you have nothing. It's just like, cool, I just twiddle my thumbs now, waiting for other people to get back to me. And then if you're in a team environment where like other people are depending on your work and they're waiting for updates or feedback, or they're waiting for you to send them something, then they're blocked as well until you send it to them. So book the scan first. Send things that depend on other people and take time for them. Do that early and then move on to your other stuff. Number 15, batch tasks together. This might be an obvious one for some of you, but let's say that you've got a bunch of like admin tasks that are not very difficult, but there's just lots of little miscellaneous things to do. Take all of those things, and instead of letting them distract you here and there throughout the day, and then like it's interrupting your flow state for the things you really need to focus and concentrate on, and then you're just building up this backlog of stuff that you're kind of anxious about, schedule a time of day, like 1 hour, where you get all of those tasks and you do all of them together. You're trying to take your relatively low effort, non-urgent things that aren't too important, put them all together and get them done in one sweep. And we do this to keep the rest of our day relatively focused and clutter-free, because number 16, eat the frog. If I hold up a frog to you and I say, eat it, your immediate reaction is probably going to be like, I'd rather not eat that living frog you're giving me. And so that's what eat the frog means. It means look at the thing that you don't want to do and do it. Because that thing that you don't want to do, the frog, is probably the task that is the biggest, the most overwhelming, is the most complicated, and therefore is probably the most substantial and most meaningful. Not all of the time, but often the bigger, meatier tasks are the ones that are the most important. They're the ones we procrastinate on. So eat the frog means that becomes task number 1. You do all of your 2-minute tasks, you book your scans, you set aside a time for doing the batch tasks later, and then your first main area of concentration and flow is the frog task. And the main reason that people don't eat the frog is because eating the frog is overwhelming. You need to write an essay. That's a lot of steps. You need to do a big round of studying on a massive topic. That's going to be a lot of work. Remember, you can't trust your brain. Your brain is trying to keep you alive. And that sounds like a lot of energy. What if we die? So we can trick our brain and make eating the frog a little bit easier, because we don't have to eat the frog. We can just nibble the frog, which is number 17. Leave tasks unfinished. This is leveraging something called the Zeigarnik effect, which is named after a Russian psychologist. And the Zeigarnik effect says that it is more motivating for us to finish a task when it is already left unfinished. And so this makes it really interesting, because now, to be more productive, our main goal is not to finish a task. If we understand the Zeigarnik effect, and we understand that overwhelming tasks become easier to finish and we're more motivated to finish them if we started and left them incomplete, our goal becomes leave tasks incomplete. Nibble the frog. Take that huge overwhelming task, make a start on it. And with the clear intention that you're not going to finish, just start, see where you get to, see what you're able to do, and then just stop. It is a liberating, freeing feeling. Suddenly, your productivity goes through the roof because you're not procrastinating anymore, because nothing is overwhelming, because every frog can just be nibbled. That's the Zeigarnik effect. Now, all of this stuff is basically trying to keep you in that flow state. Like I said, that deep flow is super, super important. But one of the things that pulls us out of flow is something called decision fatigue. So number 18 is delete decision fatigue with pre-planned choices. I want you to imagine your productivity is like a bow and arrow. When you are shooting a bow and arrow, you're spending the effort and energy up front to aim, pick the trajectory, and then fire. And when you release the arrow, that arrow is just traveling. It's just going, it's not soaring through the air thinking about where it needs to land. It's just going and landing. And when it lands, you can pick it up, aim, and then shoot it somewhere else. But decision fatigue happens when we don't do that. We don't spend the effort up front to figure out the trajectory of where we're going to shoot towards. And we are the arrow mid-air trying to figure out how to fly. Decision fatigue happens when we are trying to figure out throughout the day what to do next. And it's incredibly detrimental to staying in flow and using your cognitive energy effectively. You want to do that planning up front with those pre-planned choices. You look at what you need to do. You set aside a schedule for the day or for the week. You prioritize a task. You think about what the 2-minute tasks are. You do those. You think about what the scans are that you need to book. You do those book the scan style tasks. You think about your focus zones. You think about which frogs need to be nibbled on or eaten throughout that week. And during the day, all you're doing is executing. You've got a plan, you've got a list, and you're just going to execute. All you're doing is you're flying through the air, trying to stay in flow. That's the number one priority. And the most common thing that pulls people out from that flow, that makes it so that you have that decision fatigue, is when you don't plan for the real and you're planning for the ideal. Because when you have a fantasy schedule where you imagine like you're going to get all this stuff done and everything's going to go perfectly according to plan, and you give yourself no room for error, as soon as one thing goes wrong, it affects every other event for the rest of the day. So now you have to replan in the middle of your day. That adds decision fatigue. It makes it harder to stay in flow. It reduces your overall productivity. If you have a better plan, with more room for error and more flexibility, then if something goes wrong, it's not a big deal. It's like liquid. It just fills itself. You can stay in flow and you know what you need to do next. Once you start making pre-planned choices to reduce this decision fatigue, life just gets easier. And I think a really underrated part of self-care is taking the time to properly plan and prioritize your week. Take the time for yourself so that the future version of you has a better week. Number 19, stay on the pulse. Sometimes it's not possible to schedule everything in advance because you don't know when things are happening or you're waiting on other information from someone else. So you need to be nimble. You need to be on your feet and adaptable to changing that schedule as it happens. That's life. That's fine. This is where staying on the pulse helps. Back when I was working in the hospital, one of my first rotations in general surgery, I remember it was around 11 a.m. and my senior consultant, he comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, Justin, have you seen the blood test results for this patient? You can see that this result is abnormal." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I was just going to check that like straight after this." And he said, "No, you need to stay on the pulse. When that blood test result comes out, you need to be immediately on that and checking that. And you need to tell us straight away if there's something wrong with it. Because that patient is scheduled for surgery later that day. And that means that if this patient is unwell, they're not fit for surgery, that changes the entire surgical schedule." So that result came out around 10 a.m. So for 1 hour, I hadn't checked it. Now, for most people, that may not seem like a big deal, but in the hospital, in a surgical environment, that 1 hour is a big deal. And the advice that he gave to me that day, shout out Mr. T, sticks with me. Stay on the pulse. Figure out what is the pulse rate of the thing that you're trying to track or that you're worried about. What the pulse rate means is how quickly are things changing in a meaningful enough way for it to make a difference. For example, the blood test result, it comes out like the pulse rate on that is hourly, like 30-minutely. So I need to be checking that 30-minutely to make sure that I'm able to get that information and then relay that information because that is important. It makes a difference. So the information has an impact on what I might do, how I might prioritize my other tasks, how I might schedule my other tasks, how I might execute my other tasks. How quickly does that tend to change? That's your post rate, and that's how often you should be checking or adjusting your schedule. So if you are in a situation where you know that there are lots of things that tend to change every single day that could impact your schedule or the importance of the tasks you need to do, but you're making a schedule for your entire week, you're missing the pulse. If that's the daily change that you expect, you need to be making a daily schedule and reprioritizing every single day. Let's say you're trying to learn how to increase your focus zones and how to enter into deep flow. You should be reflecting on that every single day, maybe twice a day, because every time you try to enter into deep flow, you're getting new information. That changes how you may try to enter into deep flow the next time. One of the things I see all of the time with people learning to learn is that they'll use a bunch of new techniques and they won't spend the time to reflect on how those techniques are going and make adjustments and change their experiments for like 1, 2, 3 weeks. And so by the time they realize it's not really working, they've already spent 2, 3 weeks basically wasting that time just making the same mistake over and over and over again. And so by keeping your situation and context in mind, that tells you how often you should be creating schedules and how often you should be reflecting and how often you should be re-examining your priorities. I can remember like certain periods of my life where things were really, really busy. Like a couple years ago when I was going through India and traveling India, I was managing my team in Australia full-time while also doing workshops and traveling around in India full-time. So I was working like 19-hour days. And things were changing for me like every 2 to 3 hours. So I would be reprioritizing and rescheduling my day like 3, 4 times a day because it was just a very, very hectic month. It was very challenging, definitely not sustainable, but I was able to stay on top of things because I changed my frequency of prioritization and scheduling based on my pulse of how quickly things are changing. Number 20, learn time blocking versus time boxing. If you go and watch like anyone's video on like their top 10 productivity hacks, time blocking is going to make it onto that list. And it may even be number 1. In fact, some people, this is the only productivity advice that they have to give is to do time blocking. I have it very, very late into this video, and that's for a good reason. Time blocking will not work for you to make you more productive if you don't do all the other things that I already talked about. That's not where the money is at for most people. Most people who struggle with their productivity don't struggle because of a lack of time blocking or time boxing. But if you can do all the other things correct, then this becomes really valuable. So what is time boxing and time blocking? It's very simple. Time blocking is literally taking a schedule, putting a block of time in your day where you say, I'm going to do something there. That's it. It could be studying, like study block, boom, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. studying. That's my time block. That's it. It's just organizing your day into blocks of time. When people say make a schedule, they're basically saying do time blocking. What's time boxing? Time boxing is almost the exact same thing. You're still creating these blocks of time throughout the day. The difference is the box never changes. A block is flexible. So if you said, I'm going to study between 1 to 3 p.m., but you've just kind of not finished at 3 p.m. and you've got like 20, 30 minutes more to go, it's a good idea if you can to just stretch it out to 30 more minutes because you can finish it off like that task is done. Like you're getting more value out of that. So time blocking inherently has a level of flexibility built into it. Time boxing does not. Time boxing means 1 to 3 p.m. At 3 p.m. you stop. So there are certain tasks, and this is the key, where time boxing is actually better for than time blocking. So what kind of tasks would it be better for you to just immediately stop as soon as the time runs out, even if you haven't made as much progress as you initially planned to? Why would you ever want to do that? Number 21, distinguish urgent from important. Again, our brain sabotages us a little bit because when you think of an important task to do, often what you're thinking of is actually an urgent task to do. So our brain is very, very bad at assessing importance of anything that's long-term. And it places a heavy bias of importance on things that have short-term consequences, even if those consequences aren't particularly substantial. The best example that I give to my school students is homework. Homework is due the next day. I have to do it today. It's urgent. So when I say, what's the most important thing for you to do today? It's like, I need to do my homework. Here's a way to check whether it's really important. What happens if you don't do it? Now, different schools, different rules. But for some students, it's like, if I don't do my homework, my teacher gets upset at me. And that's it. It's like, it seems like there could be worse things in life. It doesn't seem like a huge consequence. It's like, but then I'll feel bad. It's like, but can you just deal with that? Just try to feel better. Like, it's not a really big problem. But there are certain things where there is no urgency, but it could be life-changingly important, but we absolutely cannot feel it. Emotionally, it doesn't feel important. And actually, I've got a great story for this. So one of my students is a marine biologist, and she, for a very long time, was interested in learning French because she always wanted to do marine biology work around France, and obviously she needs to speak French to do that. And so she started learning French 2 years in advance. She didn't have any job opportunities lined up, but she knew that that's where she wanted to go, and that at some point, someone's going to ask her, can you speak French? And at that point, it becomes urgent. So if she decides to be like, I can learn how to speak French, that opportunity is gone. So she, before it was urgent, decided to make the life-changing decision to spend a little bit of time every single day learning French. And then after 2 years, she developed a very high level of fluency. And yes, she did manage to get a position as a marine biologist working in France because of that. That's a great example. And there are a lot of these things where it's not urgent right now. If you did this thing, it doesn't make a difference to you right now. But at some point, it's going to matter. At some point, you're going to need this skill or attribute that takes months or years to develop. And you have either developed it or you haven't. And if you have, an opportunity is available to you. And if you haven't, then it's not. And that is the type of thing that you can't get through working in urgency. So it's very important that we actively learn to separate something that is urgent versus something that is important because the consequences and the impact that it has on our lives is significant. And then the ones that are really, really like the peak of importance, which is they're both urgent and important. If this is sounding familiar to you, this is from the Eisenhower matrix, which breaks up tasks into the quadrants of urgent versus important. You can look up the Eisenhower matrix a little bit more. And ironically, like learning to be more productive in this video is one of those things where it's going to take you time to learn to be more productive. And so the time it takes for you to learn to be more productive is actually taking away from your immediate current urgent productivity. But learning to be more productive can be life-changing. And that is exactly the type of task that you want to time box. An important but not urgent task is perfect for time boxing. This is where you have on your schedule. So let's say a Saturday afternoon is a good time for you. Saturday afternoon, 1 to 2:30 p.m. You block out an hour and a half to work on something that is important, potentially life-changing, but not urgent. This is going to shift the needle for you in the future. And you're going to just do a little bit of the work now. Every single week, you just put aside a little bit of time. Now, whether you do 1 hour a week versus 1.5 hours a week, does that really matter? Not really. The most important thing is that the ball is rolling. You're spending time week after week to work on this thing. And that's where time boxing comes in. It's not eating away into anything that might be urgent that you do need to get done, or like urgent and important, but it's also reserving time that you can protect for the things that you know are going to be life-changing, like learning to be productive or learning to learn. And the counterintuitive tip here is that when you're scheduling your week, you should actually be scheduling the important, non-urgent time box first. You actually protect and block out that time first on the thing that you know is going to be life-changing for you eventually before you fill the rest of your time with the things that are a little bit more urgent. Because if you do it in reverse, you'll find you never have time for that thing. You want to learn French, you never have time to learn French, right? But if you block it out first and you protect it, now you've made time. And everything else, you have to make it fit. But we realize that this is a thing that changes things for us massively. For a lot of people, like in university or that are studying, learning to learn is that you block out a couple hours a week learning to learn. But you might say, I'm so busy with studying, I don't have time for that. If you're so busy with studying that you don't have 2 hours a week, you need to spend 2 hours a week to learn to study more efficiently. Which brings me to point number 22. Sharpen the axe often. Here's how the old saying goes. You've got two people cutting down trees. One person cuts down trees for 10 hours. They make a pile of logs. The second person cuts down trees for 6 hours and makes a pile of logs bigger than the first person. The first person is shocked. They say, hey, what did you do in those 4 hours where you weren't cutting down trees to be able to cut down more than I did? And the second person says, sharpening the axe. By sharpening the axe, it means you get more done in less. Here's the tricky part. When do you know that you need to sharpen the axe? And what axe do you need to sharpen? Because there's so many things that you can work on. Well, you got to look for where you're spending the most amount of time to get the least predictable, least consistent returns. If you're using a blunt axe, what can you expect? You're going to be swinging for hours and hours at a tree, making incremental, tiny progress, calluses on your hands, bleeding everywhere, thumbs broken, like shoulder dislocated, your blood, sweat, and tears into this thing for medium returns. For a lot of people, that thing is studying. It's hours and hours and hours every single day studying just to fall behind even more. These are the things where it's an indicator, like it's telling you, like you can see, I am doing a lot for not very much. That's the axe that needs to be sharpened. That's where the money's going to be at. That's Sutton's Law. So if you want to dive a little deeper into some of the more nuanced productivity tips, then I do have a free weekly newsletter that you can sign up to. The link's in the description. I'll send you an email every single week into your inbox with more of this quite practical advice. On the other hand, if you're really serious about leveling up your productivity and learning skills without the years of trial and error that it took me, then you might want to check out my learning program at icanstudy.com. And unlike on YouTube, where every video kind of sits by itself, on my program, I'm able to really go deep and create a step-by-step framework for building an entire learning and productivity system. So all of those links are in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.